The moment Michael Carter looked up from the candlelit dinner table and saw his boss walking straight toward him, every ounce of warmth disappeared from his body. His heartbeat pounded so loudly that he barely noticed the elegant restaurant around him. The woman sitting across from him had just begun to smile for the first time that evening. But now her expression froze in confusion. Michael knew that look on his boss's face. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition mixed with disbelief. In that single moment, a blind date became the beginning of a night that would change 3 lives forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, second chances, and unexpected miracles can change a person's life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories that inspire hope every day. Michael Carter had never imagined that life at 38 would feel so lonely. Living in Columbus, Ohio, he spent every waking hour trying to be both father and mother to his 8-year-old son, Noah, ever since his wife passed away after a sudden illness 3 years earlier. Every day had become a careful balancing act between school lunches, laundry, overtime shifts, and bedtime stories. While other fathers enjoyed weekends relaxing, Michael spent Saturdays cleaning the apartment, helping Noah with homework, and stretching every dollar to make sure the refrigerator never stayed empty. He never complained because Noah's smile was worth every sacrifice. But there were nights when exhaustion overwhelmed him after his son had fallen asleep. He would quietly sit beside the window, staring at the city lights, wondering if happiness had quietly left his life forever. At the architecture firm, where Michael worked as a project coordinator, everyone respected him. He never arrived late, never missed deadlines, and always volunteered to help others. Yet very few people knew how difficult his personal life truly was. His boss, Richard Bennett, was famous throughout the company for being cold, demanding, and impossible to impress. Richard valued numbers more than people, and believed emotions only weakened business decisions. Michael had survived several rounds of layoffs simply because of his work ethic. But Richard rarely acknowledged anyone's efforts. Every morning Michael entered the office, hoping only to finish another day without attracting unwanted attention. The only coworker who truly understood him was Sarah Collins, a cheerful project designer who had become his closest friend. Sarah often watched Michael skip lunch to save money or rush home exactly at 5 o'clock, so he could pick Noah up before the daycare closed. She admired his devotion and quietly wished he would allow himself to experience happiness again. After months of gentle encouragement, Sarah convinced Michael to agree to one blind date. She promised the woman was kind, compassionate, and completely unaware of his difficult past. Michael reluctantly accepted, believing perhaps one dinner could not hurt. That Friday evening, Noah happily stayed with Michael's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Harper, while Michael nervously drove downtown. The restaurant overlooked the Scioto River, glowing with warm lights that reflected across the water. Everything about the place felt elegant and expensive, making Michael wonder if he belonged there at all. He adjusted the sleeves of the only blazer he owned before walking inside. Waiting near the entrance stood Grace Turner. She was 35, worked as a pediatric nurse, and carried herself with quiet confidence instead of flashy beauty. Her smile was gentle, the kind that immediately made anxious people feel comfortable. She had spent years caring for sick children and understood grief better than most because she had lost both parents before turning 25. Instead of awkward conversation, the evening slowly became filled with laughter. They spoke about favorite books, childhood memories, and the strange ways life surprised people when they least expected it. Michael found himself smiling naturally for the first time in years. Just as dessert menus arrived, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. Richard Bennett entered the restaurant. He wasn't alone. Standing beside him was his business partner and several important investors. Michael lowered his eyes, hoping not to be noticed. Unfortunately, fate had different plans. Richard looked across the room, recognized Michael instantly, excused himself from his group, and walked directly toward their table. Grace noticed Michael's face lose all color. Richard stopped beside them, studying both of them with an unreadable expression. Michael expected criticism for being seen at an upscale restaurant, or awkward questions about why he wasn't spending time working on Monday's presentation. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. Richard looked directly at Grace before quietly asking if her last name was Turner. Grace looked surprised. She nodded. Richard remained completely still. Several long seconds passed before he softly admitted that 28 years earlier he had been engaged to a woman named Margaret Turner. Grace's eyes widened. Margaret had been her mother. Silence settled over the table as years of forgotten memories rushed back into Richard's mind. Before becoming the ruthless executive everyone feared, he had once been an ambitious young engineer deeply in love. Career opportunities had separated him from Margaret. Misunderstandings had grown into permanent distance, and they never saw each other again. Richard had later learned she married someone else, and he buried that chapter beneath decades of work. Grace gently explained that her father had raised her after Margaret's passing, and rarely spoke about those years. She had only seen a few old photographs of the man her mother once loved. Richard quietly apologized for interrupting their evening, and returned to his table. But something inside him had clearly changed. The following Monday, the office buzzed with rumors. Employees expected another difficult week filled with impossible deadlines. Instead, Richard called Michael into his office. Michael prepared himself for criticism. What he received instead was gratitude. Richard admitted he had spent the entire weekend thinking about what he had witnessed. Watching Michael speak about Noah during dinner reminded him of the family he had sacrificed while chasing success. For the first time in decades, he questioned whether professional achievements meant anything without meaningful relationships. He thanked Michael for unknowingly opening his eyes. Michael stood speechless. Richard then surprised him even further by approving flexible work hours, so Michael could spend more time raising Noah. Soon afterward, he announced company-wide family support programs, expanded parental leave, and scholarships for employees' children. Workers who had feared him for years suddenly saw compassion replacing authority. Outside the office, Michael and Grace continued seeing each other. Their relationship grew slowly, built on honesty instead of fairy tale perfection. Grace never tried replacing Noah's mother. Instead, she earned his trust one patient moment at a time. She attended his baseball games, helped him with science projects, and celebrated every small victory. Noah gradually stopped introducing her as Dad's friend, and eventually began calling her family. Months later, Richard invited both Michael and Grace to lunch. He admitted that reconnecting with the memories of Margaret had inspired him to establish a charitable foundation, supporting single parents struggling to balance careers and raising children. Michael volunteered as one of its advisors, using his own experiences to help others facing impossible choices. The foundation soon paid childcare expenses, funded school supplies, and offered emergency financial assistance to struggling families across Ohio. Hundreds of parents found hope, because one executive had finally learned that compassion creates a stronger legacy than wealth ever could. As seasons passed, Michael noticed something remarkable. The loneliness that had once followed him everywhere slowly disappeared. His apartment echoed with laughter again. Noah grew into a confident young boy surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him. Grace found happiness she never expected, and Richard discovered that redemption often arrives disguised as an ordinary evening. One autumn afternoon, Michael returned to the same riverside restaurant where everything had begun. The same candles flickered across the tables. The same peaceful river reflected the city lights. This time Noah sat beside him, happily coloring on the children's menu, while Grace smiled across the table. Richard arrived later carrying a donation check for the foundation's newest community center. They all laughed about the unbelievable night, when fate had seated the right people together. At exactly the right moment, Michael realized that Sarah hadn't simply arranged a blind date. She had unknowingly started a chain of healing that reached far beyond one lonely father. Sometimes life doesn't send miracles with loud announcements. Sometimes they quietly sit down at your table. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that one act of kindness can change countless lives, please like this video, share it with your friends and family, subscribe to the channel, and tell us what part moved you the most. Your support encourages us to keep sharing stories filled with hope and compassion. Before this story ends, please leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever experienced a moment when one unexpected meeting completely changed your life? We'd love to read your story. As Michael watched Noah laughing beside Grace, while Richard smiled with genuine peace for the first time anyone could remember. He finally understood that broken hearts do not always stay broken forever. Sometimes God writes the most beautiful chapters only after we believe the story has already ended. And when kindness, forgiveness, and second chances find their way into ordinary lives, they leave behind something greater than success or fortune. They leave behind hope, proving that even the most unexpected seat at the table can become the place where a brand new life begins.